you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father, and thank you, Tom and Lorene, who decided to get this situation. Stories of grace. We all have our own stories of grace, and we just got to find the time to realize it and then to speak about it, right? We probably already know. I just want to share, again, I'm Marilyn Ouart. I've been a member here at St. Anthony's for roughly 40 years. And as many of you know me, I am the church bazaar chair. So it's a favorite position. Man, I got so many great workers under me. They all do such a wonderful job. Myself, I've been involved with the Eagles organization, and this past year I was honored with the North Dakota State Eagles Hall of Fame Award. How did I get that? By being a church member who volunteers, by being a community person who volunteers, and then also with many charities. And the Eagles are about giving, helping hands, giving charity. Rusty, my husband, is from Frazee. That's where he grew up. He was the chief of police there for a while, moved to Colorado, was on the law enforcement group there, and then on to Washington to the Boeing company. Moved back to Fargo in 1995, and in 96 we met, and later that year married. Father Vetter, he says, "Why wait? I know you well enough, Marilyn." It's like, "Oh, Father, that's only 4 months. People are going to think, and that's not what I want." Anyway, 2 years later, our oldest son, Skylar, was born. Skylar graduated from South High, and he's now 25, but he pursued a career in finance after graduating from the University of San Diego. I remember him saying to me, "Mom, Dad, you guys said if I get good grades, I can go anywhere I want." I was having trouble, him going to California. That's a long way from North Dakota. But when he said that, I had to back up. Brady was born 2 years later, 2000, and he's now 23. He's a Shanley graduate and also soon to be a graduate of UND in commercial aviation. Jaden, he was born in 2000. He's also a Shanley graduate and is also attending UND in commercial aviation. As a junior, he decided to get his pilot's license and follow his brother's career. So Rusty started our business called Ouart's Office Solutions Plus, and what we do is sell and install office furniture. And when I was pregnant, that's what he decided to do. He left pursuing a law degree himself. And I was working at United Sugars, and after Jaden was a year and a half old, our youngest, I decided to be that stay-home mom. It was time. So in 2001, 9/11 happened, and when that happened, it was really pulling at Rusty's heartstrings because he wanted to serve and defend our country. Well, it wasn't until 2006 when they opened up the age requirements to be able to serve, and if you had prior experience. So that's exactly what he did. He decided to step up to the plate. He was 42 at the time. He lost 40 pounds, signed on those dotted lines, raised that right hand, and boy, Rusty and I were pretty independent because we were so much older than average when we got married that we allowed each other to do what we needed to do. There's a picture there that when Rusty went to serve, how old the boys were. We had one in preschool, first grade, and third grade. So they're pretty young for Dad to leave. When I asked the boys, "What do you remember about Dad leaving?" And they all three said, "It's just too long ago, Mom. It was too young." They didn't remember a lot. But when Rusty left, he said, "Keep our business afloat." Oh, wait a minute. I haven't been working the business. I'm supposed to keep it afloat? Well, thank you, Lord, because that year we had the best year ever. So maybe it took me, a woman, right? Well, that summer that he went, I had 3 big jobs, and he deployed again. It was December of 2007. He first went to Fort Dix for a few months where they acclimated him, and then deployed to Iraq in January of 2008. Well, it was May of 2008 when he was too close to an IED, an explosion that took out, okay, the ladies' latrine. I don't know what he was doing over there, maybe going to the men's latrine, but that was taken out, and he was thrown about 40 feet. With that throw, it caused a traumatic brain injury, and he ended up with shrapnel. Well, now a soldier is a soldier. They'll dust themselves off, and they'll keep going. And then, don't you tell your wife what's happened. That's what we were told. That's what we learned. And it needs to be. Don't tell your wife, she's worried. Don't tell your husband the refrigerator went out. Keep it where it needs to be. So Rusty, like I said, dusted himself off, kept going, and every day where Rusty was this fob, he was getting 3 to 4 mortar attacks a day, every day of the week. So he wore his 9mm on his chest, and then he'd hit the ground with his head as he protects himself. And that went on for roughly 5-6 weeks, until one day he was in the back end of the Humvee and they were ready to go out, and he passed out. I mean, it's now 110 degrees temperature. You're in the back of a Humvee and you pass out. You come to, he was throwing up and he couldn't talk. And of course the word stroke came to mind, and they thought he had a stroke. From there he was transferred to Landstuhl, Germany, and then eventually to Fort Lewis, out in Tacoma, Washington. So he arrived there mid-June. Again, remember, his injuries was beginning of May. And he arrived there mid-June. Well, I was doing one of those big jobs, and I got the phone call at 6:30 in the evening. Of course, it's out there. The time change was different, but they needed to let me know that they'll be taking care of Rusty, but the last 3 days, his blood pressure numbers were 210/95, 205/190, 210/185, but we'll take care of him. Okay, I soon found out what "we'll take care of him" meant. We can take care of him, no need for you to come. We're not gonna pay for your airfare to get out here. Okay, well, when I got that phone call, like I said, it was 6:30 and we were doing this big job. It was a 6-week job. I had 6 guys on the job with me. And just a few minutes later, the phone rang. Now this is God. The phone rang and it was my girlfriend, Sarah, from Florida, and she asked how things were going, and I just told her the news. And she says, "I will get you a flight booked tomorrow morning, Marilyn." And she did. My head worker came walking around the corner and he says, "What's going on?" I shared. He says, "I will run the crew. You go." And what about the kids? I called my girlfriend in Mayville. Her husband was serving with Rusty, and she came 4:30 in the morning with her 2 big dogs and her son, who was Jaden's same age, and she babysat for the next week. Well, I got out there and I attended many of the appointments with Rusty, and then eventually, you know, his blood pressure numbers, they did get under control. Eventually, of course, I had to get back. I've got work, I've got kids. And he was left there working, going through many appointments himself. Again, I say, "Ask the Lord and you shall receive." I said, "What am I gonna do, Lord?" You know? They had found out that he did not have a stroke, but they couldn't figure out what was going on with him. He was having those extreme headaches, bloody nosebleeds, memory issues, just everything that was going on. Someone should have realized maybe that it's a brain injury. I, of course, not in the medical field, would never have known. But he continued with those issues, and for the next few months, like I said, he was attending all his appointments. Now, out there, when you have the soldiers out there, they're there for a whole year usually, or until your time is up with your deployment. I was told when I got back and called the National Guards, As soon as he gets a diagnosis, we'll get him back to Fargo where he has family, where he can work his time out up at the Armory. Okay. In August, it was finally time to get a diagnosis. So it was a planned trip. I flew out there, and the doctor had said, I'm not sure why you're out here. We don't have a diagnosis yet. Okay. Meanwhile, I want to share how they take care of our soldiers out there. They want to keep them active and have them in events. And Rusty was attending fishing trips on a boat, a bus ride to the concerts with that loud music, golfing. Again, he's experiencing vertigo. I mean, they went golfing and he fell off the golf cart a number of times. Well, what I can say is from day one when he got out there, they started him on many pills to help with whatever ailments he was experiencing. And pretty soon he was up to 27 meds a day. And so that was the get-go. Again, when I flew out there in August, I was greeted by our very own Jenna Krauser. You guys all remember her here from church, Jenna and Steve? Well, I did contact Jenna and ask her what her given title was, and she told me she was the Colonel of North Dakota Army National Guard Nurse Corps, and she was sent out there. She's a deputy commander of the state medical detachment and was sent out there to check on Rusty and see what her thoughts were. She worked with the deployment and the post-deployments. Out of her words said, I really think he has a TBI, traumatic brain injury. I did ask Dr. Chambers to do a brain spec scan, and that never did happen. And then in mid-October, Rusty came to visit. He came home. One of the soldiers had to escort him, and then he flew back right away. But Rusty couldn't fly by himself. He would have gotten lost. And I want to share his memory. Oh my gosh. Let's go get a cup of coffee, bring it to the table, go back and get another cup of coffee. Well, whose cup of coffee is that? I don't know. So his memory was very, very bad. Just something that I want to share was when he was home in October, I think it was like October 12th, he was playing blackjack, and that guy could not lose. And we said, how can you not lose? He says, well, I can see all the cards you guys are going to be dealing me. How is that possible? Strange, right? Okay, I'm going to go on. When he gets back to Fort Lewis, his escort, Robert called me and he says, Marilyn, the strangest thing is happening this week. And I says, what? And he says, Rusty can tell me what car is down a block away, what color car is coming, and what's following it. And when it gets up to the stop sign, he can tell me which way it's going to turn. And he is nowhere near a window to see. There's no way a mirror could reflect it. I have never seen this before. Well, that week, Rusty went into kidney failure. So I don't know if that's signs of early death. I don't know, that's the only thing I think of. I don't know, how can that happen? Anyway, I was on my way home from dropping the boys off at hockey, and his caseworker called me and asked, Marilyn, are you sitting down? And I said, no, I'm driving. She says, can you please pull over? Sure, Ramona. And I knew there was something going on. She says, Rusty's in ICU. He does know you, but he does not know where he's at or who the president is or anything. But we'll take care of him. I will be right out there. We'll take care of him. I want to see my husband if there's something that serious, right? Well, in checking the flights, the next possible flight was 2 p.m. the next day out of Minneapolis, so I knew I had to drive to Minneapolis. I called the school principals and let them know that the boys wouldn't be in school for the next week. My nephew in Minneapolis said he would babysit, and away we were going. I got a phone call from one of the parents at Nativity, and she says, Marilyn, did you book your flight yet? I says, no, there's plenty of space open on the 2 o'clock. I'm just going to book that one. She called me back and she says, I got your flight booked. Later to find out that a bunch of parents at Nativity came up with the money to send me. What a beautiful thing. Well, when I got out there, Rusty had a new doctor that week, and Dr. Chambers was no longer. And Dr. Krasnowski said he had been assigned, and I couldn't figure it out. His background was physical therapy, and he's been assigned to my husband for his injuries. I asked, Rusty had told me, there's a soldier who wants to see you, Marilyn. I don't know who he is, no idea. Well, I talked to this soldier, he was a major, and he said he had a group of guys over in Iraq that he was taking care of. And during that time, he also knew Rusty, and he knew Rusty had been in an explosion. How was he doing? And I said, an explosion? What are you talking about? Now, remember early on, whenever the doctors would ask, he would say, no, he wasn't in any explosion. No, he wasn't in any roadside bombs. But that memory wasn't good, and he didn't remember ever being in one. Well, so then I asked the doctor to do a brain SPECT scan, because again, that's what Jenna had told me to ask for. And also Dr. Johnson locally had told me to ask for that. Dr. Kradowski said, no, his MRIs didn't show any bleed. There's nothing wrong there. And I says, well, I says, when we go to the University of Washington, which is a lot like the Mayo Clinic, I will ask them to do it. He says, I've canceled that appointment. And I says, but Dr. Chambers said we could go there. And he says, it won't do you any good anyway when it comes to being released here. That diagnosis wouldn't follow you anyway. So that appointment we had waited for how many months for, and now was canceled. He says, besides that, we have a diagnosis. And I says, what is that diagnosis? And he said, it's called conversion disorder. Conversion disorder? What is that? Mrs. Ouart, he's faking it. Faking it? Why would my husband be faking all this? He says, I have no idea how he got his blood pressures up or how he got himself in here today, but yes, that's what conversion disorder is. Again, I says, I can't imagine why he'd be faking it. He says, it must be for the money. And I said, the $28,000 that we get paid on a yearly base to serve our country, to defend our country versus his six-figure income at home, I don't think it's about the money. And then he says, well, maybe it's the attention. I says, Rusty would sit at the back of the church. Of course I would sit at the front. I don't think it's that. He says, maybe it's your attention he's looking for. By then, I was a little bit perturbed, and I says, are you sure he didn't make it into your ICU unit with those 27 meds daily for the last 4 months? Well, after that, when Rusty was released, he was left with only 300 milligrams of Tylenol is all he was given. We stopped at Rusty's room and picked up his computer, and his room was ransacked. They believed that he was trying to commit suicide, so they went through his room to see what other pills he would have, and they confiscated all the pills that he was on. And when we got back to the hotel, plugged in the computer, and it was fried. I brought it home. I says, Rusty, we have a backup. All your stuff is out there. It's on the backup. That was fried as well. You know, Rusty was out there, and he's a guy who writes. He types. He puts everything in notes. And they actually thought he was an informant. And that's what we found out later. We did not know it at the time. So finally in January 2009, Rusty did get to come home from Fort Lewis. He came home with the guys he deployed with. So his year was up. So then he got to come home. We had met with Mark Fries from the law firm here, Vogel Law Firm, and Rusty's attorney there that represents the soldiers, and they told us to accept the diagnosis, get him home, and then fight the diagnosis. And so we needed to do that because he said, you will not get any more meds. Your case will not be reviewed for a year and a half. And it did take a year and a half before Rusty's case got reviewed. When we came home, Rusty was walking with a cane. He still couldn't talk. It would take 10 minutes to get one sentence out of him. Now again, this is a year and a half of no help. Nothing for him, just let's Band-Aid it with a pill. His vertigo was so extreme that there was many times he was crawling around the house. He would throw up 3 times on a daily basis. And his vomiting, he's a boisterous person. So you know how much that just killed you to hear him for 10 minutes trying to throw up because he's so sick. He spent a lot of time in bed, in the dark room, with the lights off because the light sensitivity was so bad. The headaches were extreme. Our first appointment when he got back was at Sanford because I had previously worked there. We got in right away. Like 4 days later, Dr. Knutson got us in, and she had a 4-hour visit with Rusty. Again, he couldn't talk much. I was doing a lot of the talking. She got him on some meds for his headaches, and she was known for that. And then a week and a half later, we were up at the VA, and he, as well as Dr. Knutson, agreed he has a brain injury. We were sent to Minneapolis to the TBI unit by the VA, and we spent 5 days there going through lots of medical. And there at the medical, we, one appointment after another. We met with a speech therapist, 2 hours. And then afterwards, we went and got a bite to eat. And that same doctor met us in the dining hall and said hello to us. And Rusty said, "Who's that guy?" He had never seen him before. Okay, that's how bad our memory is. Again, we spent 5 days there going through our medical, and every indication was, yes, they're going to get him in the next couple of weeks to start treating him for his brain injury. And the last day we left there, we had to meet with the head person who said, "We're staying with conversion disorder." I cried all the way home, silently cried, because I had a husband sitting right beside me, right? And for the next 2 weeks, I also cried. How can they not see this? It was in July, very beginning of July. Again, we're still in the year of 2009. Nice, hot, sunny day, and I'm still doing all the work with Ouart's office, taking care of my husband, speaking for him, getting food for him. I got 3 little boys. And my sister sure stepped up to the plate to help with the boys, meaning taking them to the lake during the summer a lot. So that really did help. But I was on the computer deleting a bunch of emails, trying to catch up with, more incoming business. And there was an email from American Legion, and I could not get that email to delete 3 times. I remember it to today. Delete, delete, delete. I decided I better open it. Somebody's telling me something. So I opened it up, and it said it was a 42-minute video about traumatic brain-injured soldiers being helped with hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Dr. Harch down in New Orleans. And that's when I said, I don't have 42 minutes. But I was strapped to that chair. Honestly, I couldn't get up. He kept me down. You're thinking, really, Marilyn? Seriously, I could not get off that chair, and I watched the video. And by the end of that video, I was crying because I finally understood a brain injury does not have to be the wound outside. It is the inside. And when my girlfriend said it's like shaken baby syndrome, it all made sense. And now Rusty could be helped. So I sent it to that girlfriend, Melissa Seitz. She helped us immensely throughout this. She represented the state of North Dakota with the Guards. And forgive me, I forgot her title, but it was the Readiness Group. She wasn't with the Guards, she was with the Readiness Group and those who were coming back. I sent it to her right away. and didn't think anything more of it, but she went and sent it to Dr. Harch, telling him Rusty's story, and took off for church to go work in the flower garden, and the phone rang. So she's at church. The phone rings. It's Dr. Harch. He contacted her right away. It was on a Saturday, and said he wanted to speak to that family. And he wants to speak to him as soon as possible. So Melissa called me, gave him our number. Melissa called me and said, have Rusty ready. So we were ready for this phone call. It took 2 hours visiting with him. And he put us, because we are a pair, right? Put Rusty in his congressional study that he was doing with hyperbarics. He had 15 people, and Rusty now is case number 16. Oh my gosh, thank you, Lord. You may ask, what is hyperbarics? It's, while we breathe the air here, normally around us, we get 20% oxygen. And hyperbarics treatments, we breathe 100% pressurized oxygen. It's oxygen under pressure. The pressure increases the healing of damaged tissues, and it decreases the swelling of inflammation. So when you hit your head, a concussion, for example, you hit your head, you have swelling. What that does is you have blood vessels, tons and tons of blood vessels in your brain, and it collapses them. Well, Rusty's had been collapsed now for 1.5 years, and hyperbarics pushes that blood flow back through and opens up those blood vessels. So that's what hyperbarics is. It does help with so many other things, but I'm just focused on my brain injury soldier right now, and that's what I can tell you about that. Well, Dr. Harch's nurse and his wife got flights booked for us, and we were down in New Orleans 3 weeks later. I remember the night before we were to leave. Of course, the kids were taken care of and everything, but the night before we were to leave, Rusty and I got into an argument because he is not going. We are not going. We don't need this. And I just remember, Rusty, everything's set up. This is what can help us. No, we're not going. Finally, I gave in and said, okay, I will make the phone calls tomorrow and let him know that we won't be showing up. Well, we went to bed. The minute I kept my eyes open, wide open, so I wouldn't fall asleep because I'm always exhausted. And the minute I heard him sleeping, I got up, packed the suitcases, and let me tell you, I stayed up the entire night because I was so afraid once I hit that pillow, I wouldn't wake up to the alarm clock. Well, at 5 a.m., we were up, and he didn't even know anything was happened the night before. Yep, let's go. So once we were down in New Orleans, our first appointment, of course, was with Dr. Harch, and then a brain SPECT scan, the first one. If you remember, I was asking for it, the first brain SPECT scan, because that's how he conducts his appointments, and then a psych evaluation. The brain SPECT scan clearly showed he was injured and it's on his left side. Remember, he was hitting the ground again on his left side. So much damage over here. Dr. Harch didn't know how he was existing. He had so much damage. And then he started his HBO treatments. So he was having 2 treatments a day, morning and afternoon, and then 5 days a week because they were open Monday through Friday. And it was a blessing to us because there was another soldier that was better off than Rusty that took over my car rental and helped Rusty get back and forth to the appointments, and I could go back home. Again, we got those 3 boys at home. Well, it was about a few weeks in when Rusty experienced the bloody bed sheets. And when he talked to Dr. Harch about it, he says, you have shrapnel. That under pressure oxygen pulls out those impurities, and you must have shrapnel inside. So they looked, and they pulled out a few pieces that were right at the edge. Now, they kept those shrapnels. Rusty wanted to keep them to show that, yes, he was injured. And that would be helpful in the years to come when Rusty received his Purple Heart. After 2 months, 40 treatments, Rusty got to come back. The kids were so excited. When I went down to get him, he met me at the airport. He was driving. It's like he could not drive before. One time he came home, he says, "Brady, tell Mom what happened." He handed me the keys. "Mom, we were driving down 25th Street, but Dad was driving down the sidewalk." So that's when he had decided he couldn't drive anymore at home. But so for him to meet me at the airport driving and then touring me around, it was like, this is a miracle. Hyperbarics. This is a miracle. I remember telling Dr. Hart, "You are my godsend." After seeing how well he was doing, he was vomiting only once a day, not 3 times. He could stand and he threw away his cane. Yes, the vertigo would hit once a week or so. The headaches were still there, but not as pronounced. We decided, and I should say, I gave the okay to do a fundraiser because those first treatments were paid for. The next treatments were on us. So I gave the okay to do a fundraiser for additional 40 treatments. So in February, we had a pork chop dinner, a silent and live auction, and a raffle, a vet for a vet. My sister had bought a beautiful red Corvette that was a few years old already, and sold raffle tickets on that. And working with Lend a Hand, they did a $5,000 match. Rusty returned to New Orleans and got 40 more treatments because of the beautiful community we live in. It's because of all of you here and all those outside who helped raise money so we could afford to go back. He did go back 2 other times for short treatments. It's kind of called a reboot. And when I say short treatments, I think he could only do 6 treatments. The doctors watch him very close. And I think the other one was 10 treatments, something like that. Well, the summer came, and we were so excited. We were invited to go to New York, Rusty and I, by Dan Daly, a firefighter from 9/11, and who was a friend of Dr. Hart's. We were guests at the Achilles race, and they were honoring disabled vets of all types, ones without legs, ones without arms, one with brain injuries. Rusty was honored to be able to start the Achilles race with Prince Harry. We got lots of pictures at home. We were treated to dinners and the Twins baseball game at the New York Stadium, lots of sightseeing. And so when we got home on Sunday, it was time to get the boys to Camp Cormorant. They were so excited they got to go to Camp Cormorant. This was one of their first times ever, but it was on a military scholarship. On Wednesday of that week, kids are down there, we woke up to a horrible lightning storm, and it was constant. The lightnings were so close. It was actually scary. And during that day, Rusty was helping the neighbor take down one of his trees that split. And then that evening, it was baseball season, and I had just left the house when I got the phone call to come back. "Your house is on fire." It was 6 p.m. And again, it was from Rusty, and he says, "What did you leave on the stove burning?" "We haven't made any food this week. The kids aren't home." But anyway, I turned around and came back right away. Our little 4-pound dog had died in the fire, smoke inhalation. But we did find out that there were 7 strikes of lightning in Prairiewood, and the insurance agent told us lightning travels through ground, through trees, and through electrical. And ours sat in our house all day long. And then finally at 6 p.m., our house went up in flames. The hardest part when we picked up those boys on Friday was telling them Jingles died. That was horrible. When I was writing this, I started tearing up again. Okay, I'm doing good today. Well, it took 4 months between recording everything for insurance and gutting the house with a few adults who stepped in to help me because, I got to be involved. we were in a hotel for 6 weeks, and then in a home about 10, 12 blocks from our home. So I was back and forth when our house was being rebuilt, reconstructed. Just before, it was in June when our house was done. And just before that, again, we were gifted for a trip to Custer, South Dakota, where we could relax. The anxiety issues, were heavy, but we got to relax in Custer. There was a couple who started scholarship, a getaway for injured soldiers. Well, let me share with you, hyperbarics was wonderful. Dr. Harch, like I said, he was my godsend. It was in 2012, February of 2012, 4 years after Rusty's injuries, that he was awarded the Purple Heart. They tried 3 different times to get this passed so he could be awarded it, and it was the shrapnel, the bleeding from the shrapnel, that finally clinched it. A TBI is not something you can see. So unfortunately, and the Army, after going and meeting with the med board, continued to maintain that it's conversion disorder. So we never did get that diagnosis changed with the Army. The VA here in Fargo, it's a TBI. Sanford, it's a TBI, okay? Dr. Harch, of course. Dr. Harch came and spoke, and some of his words were, oh man, so wonderful. He talked about Rusty and I being older than average and keeping our faith and keeping us strong. I stood by my husband's side, where so many of these young kids who come back, they end up in divorce, or mom and dad can't understand what was returned to them, and they're pretty soon kicked out of the home, they're homeless. There's 22 suicides on a daily basis yet today. Well, let me share how hyperbarics got to be in Fargo, North Dakota. For many years, Melissa and I would talk to people about trying to get a clinic set up. We talked to chiropractors. If you remember Pam, Richard came to town one day, and we got fortunate enough to schedule time with him because he was putting up the clinic just south of town, or it's down on 52nd. And because brain injury, concussions aren't always covered by insurance, he didn't want to have any part of it. But anyway, what I want to share is we talked to many people about getting it going. Well, we were at a hockey game down in South Dakota, and Gary Therrelson, his son, played hockey with Jaden. And he wanted to know where Rusty was, and I says, oh heavens, that puck goes too fast. Rusty would be in the bathroom vomiting. He says, what are you talking about? I says, oh, the game's going now. Let's just let it go for now. We'll talk later. Well, him and Connie sought me out in the afternoon and wanted to hear about it. And after telling him how much it helped Rusty, he says, why don't we have one in Fargo? There's a lot of people who could be using it. And I said, well, I've been trying, but I haven't found the right person with enough money to put one up. His response, you just found that person. That was 5 years ago. That's 5 years ago. I says, I need to book an time for you to meet the doctors so they can explain how much more it can help. And so that was December. I booked the meeting was in January, and by July, we were up and running with 4 chambers, and by December, 2 more. So, I know I never asked the Lord, why me? I can stand by that. I have never asked the Lord, why me? But I can say, please help me. Lord, help me. Those are more my words. With all that, I want to share that the boys and I have learned to be patient. Right, Lisa? We have learned to be patient with others, giving of ourselves when we can. And I'm very proud of my boys for their pleases and thank yous. They look on the brighter side of things. Today, Rusty is not with us today at our gathering. He's at home. He still suffers with anxiety issues. One of his biggest things is when somebody will say to him, "Hi, Rusty, how are you doing?" And he can't remember you. He still has short-term memory. Not as bad, not as bad. But there are things he still can't remember. So with that, I just want to read one other thing. My story is done. You're welcome to look at the pictures. Like I said, the one is when the boys, when Rusty deployed. But I want to say attitude is everything. Be kinder than necessary. For everyone you meet is fighting some kind of battle. Live simply, love generously, care deeply, speak kindly, and pray continuously. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. It's not what you gather, but what you scatter that tells what kind of life you have lived and what kind of person you are. Life is too short to wake up with regrets. Love the people who treat you right and pray for those who don't. Thank you.